I'm a boat builder from the Cotswolds in the UK, and I'm currently building a boat called Temptress, designed by Michelle Berrier and kitted by myself to be built utilising the latest in CAD design, CNC cutting and modern epoxy wood construction. Over the last probably 6 weeks, I think it is now, I've been doing some very tedious, boring and time-consuming work. It's stuff that's not really been very exciting to show you guys, but it needs to be done nonetheless, and it's kind of time spent now for gains later on within the boat building process. So that process has been epoxy coating parts. We put the boat together, did a dry fit of everything, then I stripped it all back down again, epoxy coated and pre-sanded all the components, and now they're going back in. And that's what we're doing in this video. We're now starting to put stuff back in, which is a really nice point to get to. Feels like progress again from taking everything back apart. We're actually starting to bond the first frames in and permanently locate the first components within the assembly, which is really nice. And we're also going to see the massive benefits of this pre-coating process and how it's given a really incredible finish on some of the frames that we've done, how that allows me to do a really neat glue up and basically have the internals of the boat ready for varnish. As soon as I turn this boat over, all of this is pre-sanded, cleaned and ready to start varnishing straight away. So as I said, long, boring, tedious work for gains further down the line. So thank you guys for sticking through the last couple of videos that were maybe not quite so exciting. In this one, we're going to start to make a bit more progress again, put things together. So let's take a look at the final bits of cleanup that I've done on some of the frames. Got a couple of extra little tips for you guys on that, and then we'll get gluing some bits in. And I'm going to get out of here now. God, I get too old for this. So the primary focus initially for the reconstruction of the boat is to focus on the ring frame components. So you can see any frame that's got a solid deck beam in it. These are the ones that get threaded over the stringers, as you can see by the fact that one of the frames is hanging off of them there. So these need to go in first because they're the only ones that have to be loaded in particular sequence. The rest of them can just slot into these notches afterwards. So first of all, I had to get those out and make sure that they were fully cleaned up, pre-coated and pre-sanded before they go back into the assembly for the big glue up. So they get a good sand to freshen up the wood. It was amazing actually quite how much some of these frames had darkened off since when I made them a few months ago, just from sitting around in the workshop, and I suppose a bit of kind of oxidization of the timber or a bit of UV degradation possibly to the colour, but we give them a fresh sand just to remove any cross-grain scratches and then brighten them back up. Before all the frames come out, they get these little stop blocks put in place just to make sure that everything goes back exactly where I want it. So there's a total of, I think, 4 complete ring frames that need threading onto the stringers. 9 is the most complex of those. That sits right in the middle of the boat where the big bulkhead is, and as you can see, it takes a little bit to get out. I kind of wish that I'd pre-sanded and coated this before I put the stringers in, but didn't really think quite far ahead enough on that. So with all of those out, cracked on with the coating and pre-prep process. So any exposed corner, internal corners in particular, get rounded off and softened. All of the wood gets sanded to a fresh finish, and then we apply 3 coats of West System 105 207 clear coating epoxy. There's also a lot of this kind of glue cleanup to do, little bits of squeeze out from the construction of the frames, and there's just generally kind of neatening up of the frames before we get to the coating process. Bearing in mind that this coating process is the start of the finishing process for the internals of the boat, so everything needs to be nice and neat and clean at this stage with all marks removed, nothing that we want to see in the finished boat. And of course those holes that locate those frames on the frame construction table and on the CNC machine for beveling, they can now be plugged and filled in. Okay, so I'm cleaning up frame 13 at the moment. Got this in the vise and thought this was a good opportunity to show you a little cleanup tip. So you can see right down in between the gussets there, we've got some epoxy squeeze out. Now that's quite a fiddly place to get into deep down in there, but we want this to look nice and clean. Don't want to be looking up there seeing squeezed out epoxy. So how am I going to deal with that? Obviously, as you know, epoxy is like concrete. Once it's cured, really hard. But if we just apply a little bit of heat to it, we can change that very quickly. So I'm going to get a heat gun with a small nozzle on it, so I can get right down into there without getting too much heat in the surrounding areas, and a chisel just slightly narrower than the width of the gap. Now I don't need to be very hot here, we basically just need to get this epoxy up above its glass transition temperature, which is around about 60 degrees with the epoxy, so it's not massively hot before this is going to start to soften. So I'm going to turn the heat gun on. I'm going to have this set at 250. Just so that I can get the heat in there nice and quickly, but actually the epoxy doesn't need to really get that hot. So I'll come down from the top initially so you can see what I'm doing. So you can see that's rock hard, that's going to need to be chipped away with the chisel. But if I just usher in a little bit of heat, you can see that just basically turns to a soft marmalade. Now we're not got to worry about damaging the epoxy in the joint, because we're not going to get that much heat actually in this joint area, and it's kind of insulated by the wood, which is a very good natural insulator anyway. So we're pretty good in that respect. We're not going to do any damage. We just want to feather that heat in and out until you'll suddenly feel the chisel go and it goes really soft. That's a much better way than trying to sand this or chip it away and risk doing damage to the part. And then once I'm down to the final remnants, I'm just going to turn the chisel up vertical and use that as a scraper. So there we go. Perfect cleanup right down inside that awkward space. right into the sharp corners. No sanding, nice and easy. And it looks really smart. So just need yourself a chisel and a heat gun. Not too hot, 250 degrees is plenty of temperature for that to be set to. And as I say, we don't need to get the epoxy much above 60 degrees really before that starts to happen. So don't go too hot, don't go cooking stuff. So frame 12 has this kind of partial bulkhead on it. This is going to sit either side of, I think possibly the engine, but generally in the kind of engine bay area, possibly housing around the fuel tank. I can't really remember offhand. But it's got this bulkhead and then it's got an exposed edge on it. So I wanted to do something just to cap the end grain of that, just to make sure that we're closing off that plywood end grain. We don't really want any of that exposed, certainly within you know, traffic areas of the boat. So I just machined up a really thin piece of utility veneer, and then we glue up the little capping onto the edge of that. Just roll a bit of slightly thickened epoxy onto there, and masking tape is plenty just to be able to hold this veneer in place. It's really thin, so it bends nice and easily, and you can put actually a surprising amount of force into a clamping scenario with masking tape by pulling it really tight, as you can see me doing there. So that was perfectly sufficient. We don't have to mess around with clamps. So there's one of those little bulkheads on either side of the frame, and you can see we just put a nice little cap on there just to close off that plywood. I've machined that slightly over width at around about 14 millimeters, so I can just come in there with the sander as I'm sanding the face of that plywood anyway, and take that veneer down to thickness, trimming the ends with the little Japanese saw. Then I'm just going to use a little handheld router to put the 5mm radius on this, same radius that I'm putting on all internal edges that are going to be epoxy coated. And initially I thought this was a fairly heavy radius for such a thin veneer, but actually it worked out quite nicely and ended up with the glue line kind of sitting right in the middle of that radius, and we've got no edge grain exposed on the ply. So I was really happy with how that turned out. Nice simple little fix there just to close off that plywood end grain. And there's the frame ready to start epoxy coating. Now I've done loads of this epoxy coating throughout the series. If you guys are following every video, then you're probably sick of seeing it by now, so I won't talk too much about it anymore. I've definitely improved the process as I've gone along. I've been a little bit more meticulous with trying to keep dust down. I wasn't really bothering too much to clean up the timber before I started coating, so I've been vacuuming a little bit more meticulously, and actually warming up the resin as well, which is something that just helps to reduce the viscosity of it. So I've been putting the resin only, not the resin and hardener, just in front of the heater before I apply, and that's really helped quite a lot. You can see the boat here in full strip down mode, so got those stringers lifted up, got all the ring frames unthreaded from the stringers, and everything's getting coated before it goes back in. I've got those couple of frames that I placed up in the forward end, sat there ready to be bonded when the stem goes in. I got Will in helping me for a few days on Temptress as well, and that was a massive help, so thanks for your help with that, Will. Having an extra pair of hands was essential in getting this done on time and getting things moved forward, especially lifting those stringers up and bonding frames in. So,
were they numbered somewhere?
They were. They're not anymore because I've sanded them all off. I think I know what they all are, so that should be okay. I think we'll start with 9, get the bulkhead in, and I just want to check, do some checks to make sure the legs are right, and then start getting stuff in. And then in that way. So we'll ignore all these for a minute. They can just stay as they are. Yeah, because the frames can just come in and the bulkheads can come out from underneath to coat them. So I think we'll thread the bits on next. So post coating, those frames can then go back onto the stringers again in the reverse method, but much easier having a second pair of hands this time around, certainly when it comes to getting those over the end of the stringers and over the clamps that I'm currently using as a bit of a makeshift lifting device. So with all the frames threaded back onto the stringers, we've just got to do a little bit of trimming to get them down into their final fit position. And obviously, because of the epoxy coating process, we've got a little bit of epoxy around some of the open glue joint areas. I did my best to avoid it, but we've got the odd run and stuff. So we just need to just trim that out using the little Japanese file and make sure that everything's clearing and fitting correctly. Now I want to make sure that the aft end of these stringers are in the correct position. There's not a great deal to locate them in the rear end of the boat. There's much more up forward where we've got some more solid bulkheads. So that frame 12 that's got those two partial bulkheads is the primary way to do that. Now you can see that when we've initially landed that, we've got slight error, let's say, with the bevel that I've pre-cut on these stringers. For some reason, I'm a little bit out with some of these notches. I expected a little bit of adjustment, but we're probably around about 5mm out on these aft frames. So we had to do a little bit of adjustment there. Luckily, actually height-wise, I'm correct on the internal face. So all we've got to do really is drop down the outer side of the notches on a handful of these frames, and we'll lift the stringers up slightly until that inner face matches with the bottom face of the frame, and then that gets us in the correct position. So we did a handful of adjustments there just by dropping the frame in, taking some measurements, and doing a little bit of adjustment to that notch, and then putting it back in place. So we're around about 5mm. That was the distance that we found to be pretty consistent. And then once we got that nicely landed internally and externally, you can see that we've also got that inner face there correctly landing along with the frame.
Drawing up centerline structure and profile. Okay,
What we'll try and get it like angled over and then sort of come in as best we can.
yeah,
So we'll keep bottom kicked out that way, so we don't just like slide all the glue off that joint. That's good. Bit of detail on how we can do that. That's good. just start popping some screws in the bulkhead. So everywhere we've got one of these little caps.
Yeah.
I think 4x30. So when it comes to cleanup, you can see one of the massive benefits of this pre-coating process, because we've got everything sealed, all the wood grains filled, and we're not dealing with bare wood anymore. We don't get any of that kind of typical sticky fingerprint marking that you see when doing a lot of epoxy work. You've only got to touch something with epoxy on your glove and it gets all over the place. We don't have any of that with this because we're dealing with a nice pre-coated surface. So that means that any squeeze up we can just remove with a little chisel tipped stick there, and I can just use these wipes, which these are really fantastic for epoxy cleanup work. They're just like what we call a kind of Wonder Wipe, which is one of the brand names that make them. They're a sort of lightly detergented wipe, but there's no harsh chemicals or anything on them, so this is not like an acetone or anything, and it wipes away epoxy really neatly and cleanly. You can see this also is going to remove all the dust that's just left in that surface from the sanding process. So once I've glued up, I can give that a complete wipe over, remove any excess epoxy, and you can see we get a really neat, clean finish. And you can start to see exactly what the internals of this boat is going to look like when it's actually finished. And ironically, the finish that comes off of that wipe is very similar to the finish I'm proposing to actually use with inside the boat. I want this kind of satin varnish finish. We've got a lot more varnish work to do, so we're going to build a bit more depth within that wood from what you see here, but this is kind of reminiscent of the sort of sheen level that we'll probably get, and a little glimpse into what that's going to look like inside that engine bay further down the line. But you can see the glue line's really neat there, and we're ready to go for finishing further down the line. Following day, the clamps can come off, and then I'm just going to give this frame a final clean. So just a light misting of water on a microfiber cloth is going to allow me to just remove the final remnants of dust from the bits I couldn't clean up before, and give us a really nice neat finish to how that's going to look. So I'll walk you through the glue up process that we're going to be following. Any areas that need to be bonded, which are now epoxy coated, need to be quite coarsely abraded. So 80 grit is the paper that I'm using for that. That's probably as fine as you would want to go realistically. So any of those mating faces get abraded. Any faces that are still bare wood, which is the internals of notches and some of the cutouts in the bulkhead, things like that, they get first coated with an unthickened epoxy, just to allow that to soak right into any absorbent wood grain that we've still got in this scenario. Then I'm applying a thickened epoxy using colloidal silica to the primary joints where the stringers go through the bulkheads and the frames. And I'll butter up both surfaces there, so if we've got an event where we might push some glue out the joint, we've got plenty in there. So we've got ample squeeze out, which means we've got a good filled joint, which is what we want. Then once the bulkhead's gone back up into place, I can just clean up the squeeze out from the bulkhead joint and deposit any of that squeezed out epoxy into the notch that the frame's going to then go into. Then the frame can get paired up to the bulkhead. So I'm rollering on the epoxy here. So we've got something that's lightly thickened. So we're kind of part way between the unthickened, thickened bonding process, because the faces of the frames are still bare wood. And it's not really essential to do a two-stage bonding process for this. So that gets rolled with lightly thickened epoxy. And I'm using the 407 to thicken that, just to give a coloured glue line to the joint all the way around the bulkhead and the frame. So that can then get slotted into place, and the two can be paired back up again. So we've got the bulkhead coming up to the stringer from underneath, you've got the frame coming down from the top. These can then be screwed back together, and there is the kind of final bond and location to get that stringer put in place. Some additional clamps needed around the outside just to make sure we've got really good contact between there, and a nice even bit of squeeze out all around the internals. Can then do a final cleanup, go around with that chisel stick and just get the bulk of the epoxy out the way. Get a nice clean corner to the joint, and then come in with those Wonder Wipes again, and because we've got pre-coated faces everywhere, everything just wipes clean really nice and easily, so we can get rid of all of that excess, and there's literally no other cleanup or prep to do once this is dry. So go all the way around the inside of that frame as well and just clean up all of that squeeze out, get back to a really nice neat finish. So frame 4 is bonded in. We've got frame 3, that's the only remaining ring, frame and bulkhead to go in. So that'll be next process as this. We're going to get that all bonded up and dropped down and into place. Then we'll bond frame 2 to the end of the stringers next of all. That's a complete bulkhead and frame, but of course this is the end of the stringer, so this is a little bit easier. We can take this out. I'll then put the stem in. That will go back in next, now that we've got once we've got frame 3 in, sorry. All of the frames in the middle are going to be open, so we've got quite simple partial bulkheads there which can just come out and go back in. The frames can load over the top, so we'll drop all those in, and they're all looking pretty good on the slots. We've got a couple of little, that's just going to pull into line, so that'll be okay. There's 9. It's looking nice and neat now with all the clamps off. This one will probably be next, so I'll bond 12 in next. I've got that clamped at the moment just to keep those stringers in their correct position back aft, because that's pretty much the only thing that's kind of positioning these at the moment width wise to keep them correct. But we've got the height all dialed in nicely, and we've got this frame notch also trimmed for frame 13. So those will go in, and then the transom can go on after those two. And then we'll do 11 and 10 in the middle here, and then that'll be all the frames bonded in. So that'll be quite a cool stage to get to. So that's where I'm at, making some progress again, which feels like progress anyway. I have been progressing through the epoxy coating stage, but it's a massively time consuming thing, and it doesn't have a great deal to show for it. But you can see the results of that in the finish here, and it's really going to pay dividends down the line. So it's worth taking the time to do it and do it nice and neatly. So that's the 2 primary bulkheads in. This means that these are really firmly fixed in place now. That's a nice stage to get to. I'm going to press on with doing the rest of the frames, and we'll probably aim to get all of those in the next video. And then we can move on to something else. So we'll probably after that start putting in, I expect the chines, possibly the keel, and moving forward with bonding in some additional elements. So that'll be a really good stage to get to. If you want to build one of these boats yourself, don't forget that I sell the plans for this, so you can build one of these at home. You can take the set of files that you download to your local CNC shop, or cut it on your own machine if you're lucky enough to have one, and you can replicate this entire process. We've also got a kitting service coming very soon over in the US, and of course I can supply kits within the UK, so if you want to buy a boat kit, we can sort you out with that and help you out with everything that you need along the way. So bear that in mind if you fancy building one of these boats for yourself. So that's all we're going to cover in this video. Feels like progress, so I'm really pleased with that. Hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for watching, and an extra special thank you to everybody on Patreon who is pledging a little bit of extra monthly money just to help me to try and fund this project on my own, which is what I'm currently doing. So greatly appreciate the additional support there, guys, and thank you to everybody that watches the series. So I will catch you in the next video where we'll get some more frames in. Cheers, guys.